Hello SGD, this is one of the famous lost ancient high technology pieces in the Cairo Museum. This ancient Egyptian saw cut proves they had lost technology. Links in the description. Let's first look at a few little bits of video to get an idea to what's going on.
Yet a sarcophagus or coffin makes it clear that ancient masons could cut straight edges. Close up, there are striations, marks made by the movement of a hard edge.
These striations, I'm going to go into it more in the video, but this tells us a very important feature about what happened with this particular box. And I notice the different angles. Well, this tells us what happened, more information further on. Now, let's look at another clip.
So this is the other side of it, and it's kind of recessed out. And coming around this way, so there's a bit of a line going down here, and then across the top there's this line that tracks through here also and leads to the cut, although the cut's kind of gone off in a way. And here is yet a further look. Now you can kind of see that it undulates along here, and if you touch it, it undulates also. Now there is a straight cut through here, and yeah, this is like, it's hard to tell if it is a straight line through there. I'll just get a good look at it, or a curved one.
Screenshot from that previous video clip, we can see the straight cut running parallel with the short end of the block, again indicating that was the direction that the saw was moving back and forth, and it was cutting across the top of the block. Now in the middle where the lid is broken, we can see two close-up and a close-up just to get an idea what's happening. We'll cover that more, but there's another angle, and we can see that then this is a straight cut as well. This is an important feature. So now let's go through the photos, examine it, and see exactly what's happening. This ancient Egyptian saw cut proves they had lost technology. Bright Insight, Brian Foster, just in general, the lost ancient high technology community love to show this one, and they use the example that this going off target, well, that proves that they had a high speed saw, because you wouldn't make that mistake. And it must be going at a really high rate because you didn't pick up the mistake. Well, okay, let's look at the actual evidence of what's going on here. Here's that the box, the sarcophagus, when it was removed from the tomb, the original tomb, Eastern Cemetery of the Great, so just on the east side of the Great Pyramid. Djedefhor. Now, I'm not interested in the history of it. It's meant to think as Khufu's son, what they say. Well, okay, that's not my area, but we look at the box, and so once they cleared up the site, we can see the break, the partial cut, and that it was placed in the tomb, whether it was before it was robbed or whatever. I don't know what was going on in there, but we can see that they've just, to keep it horizontal, they just put some stones there underneath. The area is still in a tomb, but now it's flipped on its side, and so we can see the bottom where the lid should have been removed, and then we got it out there in the sun. And again, you can see this cut, which apparently is proof of lost ancient high technology. Comparison to the old photo and how it is now in the museum. There are two bunch of important points to take note of. So firstly is we can see this trace here, and in the middle here, well, the stone isn't cut there in the middle. It's cut from the top, cut from the bottom, but the middle part is not cut. Okay, this is going to tell us a lot. Alright, so that trace that runs parallel with the short end of the block. There in the middle, we see this ridge and very deep striations, and of course the saw cut mark along the top. So the impression is that I had, and there seems to, having watched a few of these videos, that this saw cut goes straight down and would come out the other side. Okay, that's not the case. Alright, so let's look at the box now. Highlight that area. You can see that saw mark, so in original condition, it wasn't something that happened later, and that this saw mark again runs parallel with the short end of the block, telling us which direction the saw was moving, whether it's steel or copper. So you got a long thin piece of steel, you can wobble it, it's wobbly. So as they were cutting, part of it started digging in, and then they fixed it up. So you have a sharp end to there, and then okay, we've sorted out that problem. So what's happening? We had a saw blade moving side to side, but cutting in that direction. And the cut was going well until they reached that area, and we just move in and we can see that little ridge sticking out. Get a better view of it. So you see there's a ridge there, but also the striation pattern, essentially running at 90 degrees, almost 90 degrees from each other. Another photo. So again, deep striation marks, and especially here you can see that those running along that ridge are at a similar angle, but the further you move away, the more it moves, the angle broadens out. That's telling us a very important thing as well. Alright, so now let's compare, so we can see the side of the box and where that lost technology cut is. Compare it to the position. Alright, so again, this piece here is not cut. You can see that ridge there, but there's no cutting that's been happening there. But at the top, along the side of the box, it has been cut in. Well, what's going on? It's very easy. So now we just take that ridge and just using that as a... Okay, we extend that red line out. It meets up exactly where this cut happened. Look at the side of the box. So at the top, we have a very deep cut in that it cuts further back. For instance, the top of the box, see how it cuts in, but in the middle it's not cut. Okay, we know the direction of the saw blade. When they finished cutting, the saw was at this angle. When they started, it was more horizontal. But again, if you've ever cut something with a saw, you know that the part nearer the handle is where the meat is getting cut. At the end of a saw, you're not really cutting anything at all because there's very little pressure being applied. Something like that it would have looked. We can follow the directions of striation pattern. So the last cut was moving in that, as indicated by the red arrow, but the further you go back, the angle starts to change, so we know what was happening. The yellow arrow again shows us what direction the saw was coming. So we had two independent saws now. We had one saw originally cutting across the block. Now we have the lid broke, and now we have two independent saws working. We can see them. Okay, so yeah, all right. We were cutting across, the lid broke, and now they changed from one saw going across to two saws working independently from either side. Now those saws were able to cross because the ridge. So the yellow one was lower and the blue higher, so these saws were able to cross one another, so they weren't butting into one another. Now we look at the top. Okay, this line is running really nice and straight. Where does it go off target? It goes off target exactly where the lid broke, which is exactly where we have this change in cutting style. Yeah, this was not a high-speed machine that went off target. We have 2 stages of cutting defined by where the lid broke. So again, the earlier part where we have that horizontal, with a parallel line, parallel with the short end of the block, it's much smoother, doesn't have the deep striations, almost polished, so we know this tells us about the grit that was being used. And then we have an area with deep striations, and so we look at the top, we can get some good photos here. So that cut mark, well, again, you can see there are very deep striations in there, unlike the first stage of cutting before the lid broke, and you can see them there. Again, these are telling us the direction of the cut. So again, the further you get, these are more angled following this line, but the further you go back, the more they move towards the horizontal, just like those lines do. Okay, what's going on? We know exactly what was going on. They were cutting from that side, moving in that direction. The saw was going side to side. We can see that in the traces left behind. It was a honed surface, so they were cutting with a finer grit. I would think a very fine high quartz grit. Disaster, the lid broke off. Cutting style now changed. So we have now two short blades working, one from either side, beginning, as the picture shows, I think it would have been on the base, but now it's on its side. But so as you start cutting that way, but the handle being on the outside of a block is where the more pressure is applied, and so the further you cut in, just like we saw the change in the striation angle, well, that's what happened. Okay, and it's from this point that the cut veers off. So this was not a high-speed machine that went off. It was earlier they were doing a much nicer cut, paying more attention. The lid broke, and now it's, well, just crap. Let's just get this thing done. Now I would assume that a break like this, if not deliberate or accidental, would be like a terrible thing, prestige or spiritual wise, or however you want to put it. And so at that point it was like, yeah, you wouldn't want this spot. It would be like a super rich man turning up in a second-hand Toyota or something like that. It wouldn't be seen. It wouldn't be the thing to be seen, to have your name attached to. And we had 2 saws working, and we had the same marks to match that. Both saws were able to work at the same time because one would have been passing underneath the other. Again, striations are telling us, and the deeper striations now tell us that they didn't care about leaving these deep grooves at this point. Earlier on, nice smooth surface. When this part of the cuts happened, now we see a change in grit. So we're probably using larger grit, so like a really coarse sand. The earlier part using a fine sand to leave a nice smooth finish. And you could polish it out later, of course, but we see a difference, the direction that the saw was moving and the surface that was left by that saw. 2 distinct phases, perfectly separated by the point where the lid broke. That's it. Stage 1, I was sawing across the block, not leaving the deep striations. The lid snapped, and then they changed. Deep striations, angle size, all of those parts that I've just shown. This is not proof of lost ancient high technology saw that went off course. It's just at this point the lid's already broken. We don't need to, don't worry, don't fuss with trying to be neat. We've just got to get this thing fixed now. Changing cutting style, the striation style, which means the abrasive and the amount of water, and well, they knew what they were doing. They weren't stupid back in the old days. Now the second, but it still could be power tools. Okay, still, but it must be power tools because it just takes too long to cut, and no one would spend time cutting. All right. Yes, they did. Yes, they would. It was still done in the age of photography. It was still happening. It is totally feasible to cut by hand-powered tools. Not only is it feasible, it was how it was done. Yeah, all right. Links in the description to the experiments I've made, and go in a little bit more detail about this. Now, if you've got a granite bench top, almost certainly it was cut with a gang saw, which is a series of blades that, like, whether they are copper or steel, doesn't matter, series of blades moving back and forth, and a modern gang saw will cut between 20 to 25 mils per hour. Maybe the nicer ones, the more expensive ones, are cutting a bit faster than that. But that is feasible. People are still done now. Just instead of hand powered, it's powered by a machine. And with my experiments, I was getting 8 to 10 mil cutting through granite, so essentially half the speed of a modern gang saw, which is completely feasible. And I could improve on that as well. I matched the striations, the profiles, everything. It's all sort of, lost ancient high technologists. They don't know what modern tech is. They don't know what ancient tech is, and they don't know what a hard day's working with hand tools are. And yet they talk and speak to it. And then, well, Christopher Dunn's completely busted. He's done. He's a hoaxer. He's a faker. All right. Yeah. Proof's in the pudding. The evidence on the actual block is unambiguous. And the idea, well, it's too slow to cut by hand. No, it isn't. No, it's just no. You can't say that. That's wrong. It's wrong to say. Otherwise, this is all CGI. All our history is all just fake. The archaeologists manufactured these photos way back in the old time because they anticipated YouTube and Bright Insight, Brian Foster, Uncharted X would be harassed by the establishment, and this was all just set up by the Smithsonian. It's a paranoid delusion is what it is, and by those who are promoting it and very clever with their scripting and their rhetoric, they're not deluded. They know what they're doing. They're genius at it. All right, but there you go. Nothing to it. No mystery. No lost ancient high technology. Done. Now I'm going to play the relevant parts of a clip from a video that's available on YouTube, Granite Cutting or Drilling, which shows an experiment done by Dennis Stocks. Now, this experiment is nearly 30 years old. You watch Brian Foster, Uncharted X, Bright Insight. This is the only thing that exists. They haven't read Dennis Stocks' books. They won't cover the experiments that have been done later. They just love to hold on to this piece of information, censor everything else. Let's go through. I'm going to play the clip, the relevant parts, and then we'll go through and break it down. And again, lost ancient high technology is a scam. They cover up information. They don't do experiments. Experiments get done that they ask to be done, and then they don't cover them, and then they keep going back to this old piece, and they don't cover Dennis Stocks' work since then, the work done by others, or what's in his actual book and the results that he gets, or compare them to what's actually happening with modern tools. They just say it's unfeasible. Well, modern tools that are actually widely used, therefore, would also be unfeasible. Let's have a look at that clip.
Answer.
All right, we have a big block of granite here. So how's this copper going to cut this granite?
We're going to use the saw in a reciprocating or backwards and forwards motion.
Dennis Stocks, an expert in ancient technology, suggests the Egyptians had a trick up their sleeves.
So get started.
So you're going to chip a groove, and then you're going to put the copper and slide it back and forth. But how, and that's going to cut the granite?
No, Mark.
Even with teeth, the copper alone is too soft.
Okay, well, what is actually going to do the cutting? It seems to me that copper is just going to blunt on granite. I can't believe it's going to cut the stone.
We're going to put sand inside the groove, and we're going to put this saw on top of the sand, and then let the sand do the cutting. All that needs to be done is to move the saw backwards and forwards in a nice, steady motion.
You don't want to lift it up and get those grains in there?
No, they'll work themselves in as it goes.
Yellow?
Okay. Yeah. That's it. Now, the stone weights at each end of the saw are putting the load onto the sand and causes the cutting. The crystal is forced to score a groove in the stone.
So the copper is only guiding the sand's doing the cutting.
Right.
Now, Dennis, will we see any progress in our lifetime?
Yes, if you came back in an hour's time, you would see about a 4mm cut down into the stone.
You're kidding. In an hour, you'll be 4 millimeters down?
Well, I've been doing a lot of experiments, and I can guarantee that this will cut through the stone at about 4mm an hour.
When it comes to proving he's right, there's no holding Roger back.
Sawing went wonderful once we switched over to using water with the sand. As you can see here, we achieved this in just a few days.
Both methods work, and both produce the same pattern of etched lines as in the old tombs.
Okay, so if we look at what's happening here with this particular cut, again, it's the only experiment that you'll ever see mentioned. They're using, air quotes, soft copper saw. Work hard and copper bloody hard. They made weapons out of it. The thing is, whether it's the copper or the steel, it is not the steel or the copper that cuts any more than it's the paper on sandpaper that cuts. It's the sand that cuts. The copper or the steel or the paper or the wood or the rope or the plastic is just there to push the sand against the stone and do the cutting. Second point, he's using a low quality abrasive, desert sand, and he's applying it dry. If you used crushed granite dust, crushed sandstone, it has a higher Mohs rating and it would cut much faster. So this could be cut, he's using desert sand is mixed with organic material, bits of limestone, that type of thing is mixed in there, which is not a good cutting agent. Next, these guys aren't exactly working at a cut, this is old man speed. They're putting no speed into this. And another point, the weights themselves are not a good idea. I think these have been, in later work, Dennis Stocks doesn't use them because they just tire out the workers and they're not giving a return that they tire you out, but they don't give you extra cutting speed. It's the sand that cuts. You're better off doing it faster. Less weight, but going back and forth faster. And, well, it's only 4 mil per hour. Again, Lost Ancient High Technologists won't cover the later work where he improved his speed, and he won't cover the later work of others such as myself. Here I am cutting. Now I've got two saws running at once, so but your saw is only short. Well, the saw's actually double the length because I've got two blades running at once. You can see the two grooves there. Because I'm doing it on my own, I have to regularly stop and apply abrasive. When you saw that Dennis Stocks experiment, one guy was sitting there pouring in the sand, the other two people were working the saw. That way you could reduce tiring because every 5-10 minutes you swap around. Everyone goes to a different station, and so that you're not constantly working the saw. I don't have a heavy weight on there. I just put speed. I'm just pushing down with my finger, but I'm moving the saw much faster than what they are. And because of that, I got a 2.5 times the speed that Dennis Stocks was cutting with. I got nearly 10 mil an hour. Probably could, again, I had to stop and apply the abrasive. So that speed could be increased because, again, I had to. If I was part of a team, I wouldn't get tired out because I wouldn't be constantly at that. I would have a time to rest because I would be applying the abrasive sand. And so again, rotating, and the blade is constantly in motion. That's the important part. It's not about the putting a big heavy rock there to push it down. That's going to wear out the copper more rather than add to the cutting speed. Now, I got 8 to 10 mil. 8 is the minimum that I get. Now in the top corner you see is modern technology with steel blades tipped with diamond. This is a gang saw. Just like I have two blades running at once, a gang saw has multiple blades running at once, and all they do is move back and forth, but instead of being powered by a water wheel, as the Romans did, because the Romans had these, or you could have them powered by hand. Either way. Now, a modern gang saw, I think maybe we're up to about 3.5 centimetres. You go back a little bit back in time, no, or less. Still, to get 20 to 25 mil per hour is a reasonable rate, completely feasible. And you can see my speed compared to a machine is basically the same, but they're using diamond. So, yeah, there you go. So, not very long ago, hand-powered saws to cut stone were the norm. It is completely feasible. So for Lost Ancient High Tech, look, it can't be done, it takes too long. Yes, it can be done. No, it doesn't take too long. You're just living in a privileged part of history where everything gets delivered Amazon Prime style. I want it now, I want it now, I want it now. Well, not so long ago, and throughout all of the rest of history, that just wasn't the way the world worked. If you want to look at history, you've got to look at the context of how the world used to be, not apply how you live your life now. Does not prove they had lost high technology. The markings, the evidence, or everything says it's feasible to do by hand. The markings match those done by experiments. You can links in the description. You can, if you don't believe it, you only need an hour or two to do the test to do enough to work out how long it takes to cut and to be able to look at the markings that are left behind. I do instructional videos, not just like here's my data. I show you how to fact check myself. I want to be fact checked, but the lost high technologists will never lift a finger. They just keep repeating the same thing. This proves that they did not have lost high technology, because if they could do a super high speed cutting rate, just like Chris done with Core 7, well, why is it wobbly? Oh, well, because they couldn't hold the tool straight. So they can't build a friggin' frame or a jig, yet they're able to build these, super advanced, high-powered machines that cut through stone faster than what we do today. So, not lost ancient high technology. More importantly, the lost ancient high technologists don't show you all the little details in here. I haven't visited the Cairo Museum. I'm able to pick these things up, yet they, armchair archaeologists. Well, I mean, just because I visit a hospital doesn't make me a brain surgeon. So, to the lost ancient high technologists, I've done the experiments. How about you do them? Prove me wrong. We can do a live stream challenge. You work on your side, I work on my side, and we see what gets done. Please, actually, if you're going to report these things and say it proves lost technology and accuse the archaeological mainstream establishment of covering things up, well, how about you cover things up? You're the establishment, you're making the money, you don't contribute anything, you don't even report on the actual details. You can see that this particular sarcophagus is one of the go-tos for lost ancient high tech by people who've been there multiple times and accused, they've moved it around a museum, they're trying to cover it up by moving it in the same friggin' public museum. Come on. Alright, so, the low quality research, even when they've been to this place, they've never done any work, and they don't understand that only a short time ago hand-powered tools were actually the norm. There's nothing here. Lost ancient high technology is a scam.